Kia ora everyone. In today's video, I would like to share with you some information about my trip to Australia. And I know that I promised you that, and some of you also followed this trip on Instagram, and you knew already where I've been in Australia. But I thought that in this video I'll just do a little map tracing, and hopefully it will be an information but also some tingly sensations as well. So I understand, of course, that this is pretty low, or maybe like just a small resolution map, but I don't really have any capacity to print larger maps, so I'll just be working with this one. And I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with how Australia looks, and this is a little piece that you can see, piece of land as part of New Zealand. Obviously the North Island with Auckland, the biggest city, and the capital in Wellington. And of course the South Island, you can only see part of South Island with famous Queenstown. And here is the blue dot and the place where I live. So you can imagine that from there we had to get into Cairns, which was our final destination, and we only had just over maybe 11 or 12 days. And I also printed out here a list of all the places where we stayed, and you can see that we started our journey on the 31st of May, and then we traveled almost every day, well actually precisely every day, until we arrived to Cairns, where we stayed for several nights, and then we went back to the airport in Australia and flew back to New Zealand. And this is usually how I plan my trips, and I'm not sure whether that's something that everybody does or just me. But what I do, I usually have 3 columns in my spreadsheet that I develop, or just a table. And in the first column I usually put the dates, and in this case we started on 31st of May, and then the rest of the dates were in June. That's why I didn't put any month's name in here. And then I have a second column where I actually put information about where we're going. During the last 8 years while we lived here in New Zealand, most of our holidays are road trips, and that's why the spreadsheet like this or table is quite useful. So in the second column I usually put where are we going to from and to. And in this case, for example, Nelson to Auckland flight. The date of the time of the flight, because the date we have already here. Sometimes I also put some other information about the flight number and other stuff, but I already deleted it. And then obviously there's the third column where I put information about the hotels where we're staying. Sometimes when I have a lot of time to plan the trip, I would have a 4th column, and in that 4th column, there will be just somewhere around here, I would put some information about what I would like to visit during that time when we stay in a specific town or location. And so, for example, if I know that there is an amazing national park in this town, and I would like to ask for your forgiveness in advance because I may not know the correct pronunciation of those towns. So how I call this town is Gympie, but it may be Gympie or something else. And this one is Bororan. And again, excuse my pronunciation, but let's say there is something really interesting, a national park or some attraction, and in this column I put information about it and that we want to visit it while we are here. But during this trip I actually didn't have anything in the fourth column because I didn't have time to plan anything at all, and everything was a surprise. And so I'll just show you on the map what happened. So in New Zealand, Nelson, where I live, is a pretty small town. And unfortunately, there are no direct flights to Australia from Nelson. So I wouldn't be able to fly from Nelson directly to, let's say, Sydney or Melbourne. But what usually happens is that people go from Nelson to either Wellington, Auckland, or sometimes Christchurch, where we have international airports. And this time from Nelson, we actually flew to Auckland. I just want to maybe draw a line of our travel on this map for you. I'm going to take this green pen and put a line from Nelson to Auckland, just right here. Just like that, so you can see that this is the distance that we had to travel. And because you never know what's going to happen with planes, whether they will be on time or delay, we actually spent in Auckland night before our flights. And then we stayed in a hotel in Auckland. It was raining, it was quite late, and we went to McDonald's to have some dinner. And we had to get up at 3 a.m. to get into Auckland International Airport for our flights. And from Auckland International Airport, we actually flew to Sydney. We flew to Sydney in this location in Australia, just here. And again, let me draw a line on the map from Auckland to Sydney. So you see the pathway. Just like that. Right. Look, we had to travel to Sydney. And if you look on the map, you'll be able to see that Auckland is actually not much further south than Sydney. So the weather is maybe quite similar, maybe a little bit warmer in Sydney, because you know that in the southern hemisphere it's the opposite. You have warmer areas on the north and colder on the south. I know it took me a while to get into this. Usually when you are in the northern hemisphere, the south is where you go for warmth. but in the southern hemisphere. South is where the cold weather is ruling, because then you are closer to the southern pole. So we traveled to Sydney, and in the same day from Sydney we took another plane to Gold Coast. And there will be another line from Sydney to Gold Coast. Just here, I'm going to draw the line to Gold Coast from Sydney. Right here. Look at that. So in Sydney it's very easy to get to Gold Coast. The flights are very regular and they are not that expensive. So from Sydney domestic airport we arrived to Gold Coast. And then in Gold Coast, our road trip began. We drove all the way to Cairns, which is a city on the north part of Australia in the States that is called Queensland. Queensland. You see that Australia is divided by the territories, and each territory has its own, let's say, capital. The capital of New Zealand is Canberra, and Canberra has its own territory. And obviously, some of it is smaller than the other. And Queensland is the territory of Australia where we travelled this time. From Gold Coast on the south of Queensland, we travelled north. And I have a little bit bigger map to show you that specific area of Australia, so you can imagine it a little bit better. Look at that. Is it better? A little bit, right? So you can see here, hopefully, the road that we took from Gold Coast here, very close to Brisbane, all the way to Cairns. A very long road. Very long road. I think it was about 1,600 kilometers. So we hired a car in Gold Coast and had several stops on our way, but we didn't go all along the shore. We actually went, I think, like that, and then all the way to Cairns. And here you can see the boundaries of the Queensland territory. Of course, it is interesting to see that some of those lines are straight, and you can imagine that those straight lines, they represent also the plain terrain of Australia. There is a desert just in the middle of it, and that's why it's easy to divide it in straight lines. If you had lots of mountains here, lots of rivers, then those boundaries of states would probably follow some of those valleys and rivers, but because we are dealing with the desert in the middle of the country, of course, straight lines are possible. So, as I say, we arrived into Gold Coast, and I will just show it with the little circle on the map, Gold Coast. And we stayed there overnight in a very nice hotel overlooking the harbor with beautiful tall buildings, and the hotel where we stayed had several rooms and 2 bathrooms and an amazing view. We arrived quite late and we were able to see the night city from our hotel balcony, but then in the morning the view was pretty incredible as well. And then from Gold Coast we traveled to Gympie, and to be honest I don't remember where it is exactly on the map, maybe somewhere here. And so we stayed in that little town overnight. We spent the entire day in Gold Coast and then traveled in the evening and just stayed in that little town. And in the morning we woke up and straight away we hit the road again to go to another little town. I think it's somewhere around here, called Baroran, and we stayed overnight there as well. There was nothing specifically interesting in those little towns. We just visited some local areas, local parks, and enjoyed the warm weather and Australian wildlife. And then from there we traveled to Rockhampton. We stayed in a really nice motel in Rockhampton. Most of the time we actually cook for ourselves, and maybe once we go out for a dinner or lunch. And then from Rockhampton we traveled again, and that time we actually had quite a lot of drive, and there were 333 kilometers traveled to Mackay, just here. Mackay on the coast. It was really nice to be back from the inland road on the coast again. And we spent the night in Mackay. And again, there were several wildlife parks that we visited because during this trip we were mostly interested in wildlife. And from Mackay we actually had to travel all the way to Townsville the next day, which was quite a long drive again, and it was getting also hotter and hotter. When we arrived to Gold Coast, maybe it was about 19 degrees Celsius, and by the time we arrived to Townsville it was already 30 degrees. So we traveled to Townsville So we traveled 386 kilometers from Mackay to Townsville, and this is quite a big city. I think it was about 170,000 population, and it is quite beautiful. We really liked the public art, all the murals and architecture in Townsville. We really enjoyed walking along the esplanade and seeing an amazing infrastructure for catching jellyfish. This wasn't a season for jellyfish when we were there because it was June and winter time in Australia, but you can see that this is coral sea. I'll show you. This is coral sea, and it is quite warm. During summer, a lot of jellyfish come to the shore, and they also obviously breed during this time intensively. And this is the Barrier Reef, Great Barrier Reef, and the jellyfish are poisonous. They can cause quite a lot of trouble for those who are being stung by jellyfish, and that's why on the beaches, in the public areas, they set up special nets, and you can swim just in between those nets and be protected from jellyfish. In Townsville, there are quite a lot of boats going out into the Great Barrier Reef area for snorkeling and diving. But we were going to visit those areas in Cairns. That's why we dedicated some time to just explore Townsville city, and we didn't really went out offshore in that town. And after spending some time in Townsville and exploring local botanical garden and some other public spaces of interest, we traveled to Cairns, over here, up north. From Townsville to Cairns, we drove 347 kilometers, and we stayed in Cairns for 4 nights, exploring the area, and of course there we went to explore also the Great Barrier Reef and some smaller islands around. I really enjoyed how interesting the sand looked on those islands. I cannot call it sand because they were just corals all over, just lots and lots of corals on the beach, white corals that I really enjoyed playing with. And in Cairns we visited different wildlife parks and of course enjoyed the city itself at night and during the day. Spent a great time on the boat, and Yaro, my husband, went diving. I was snorkeling, and it was so amazing to see all those incredible creatures underwater, including reef sharks and turtles. And our last day in Cairns, we just went for a little walk and had a really nice dinner, and then we flew back to Gold Coast, and we just flew back to Gold Coast all the way from Cairns to Gold Coast. And then, unfortunately, we had to leave Australia, but this time from Gold Coast we flew back into Wellington. Just here, I'll show it to you with my pen. From Gold Coast we flew back into Wellington. Back to Wellington. So here we travel this direction. Let's see. Like this, and to Gold Coast like this. And then from Gold Coast we traveled back. Travel back to Wellington, and then from Wellington back to Nelson. This was the final plane that we had to take, and we flew back to Nelson. You can see that it was a trip of our life. We visited so many places, and it was very diverse. We had to spend quite a lot of time driving, but it's good because now we know all those places, and we've been to Canberra and explored Sydney several years ago. So all that territory is now familiar to us. And next, we're just going to go to this area to see Uluru. And Alice Springs is a place where people usually go to, and then from Alice Springs they travel to Uluru, having different maybe guided trips or buses or four-wheel drive. Sometimes they can take planes as well and visit that iconic place in the outback of Australia. So I hope you enjoyed this video about our trip to Australia and the tracing on the map of those different locations, some drawing involved, and soft spoken voice with some maps and tables. So that's it for today. I'm really grateful to all of you for listening, and let's keep in touch. Maybe if you have any suggestions for what we can visit next time when we are in Australia, let us know.